Libyan warplanes continue to pound rebels advancing toward the Libyan capital of Tripoli. This as Arizona Senator John McCain is pushing hard for a no-fly zone over Libya to prevent these kinds of attacks. And while Senator McCain is against putting U.S. troops on the ground there, the White House says all options are on the table. All options? What about just leaving Libya alone to sort out its own problems? With us now, Malou, senior foreign policy analyst with the Cato Institute. Malou, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you for having me.
What would it actually take for the American government to engage in a no-fly zone? I mean, how difficult, how expensive, how costly, how time-consuming would such a maneuver be?
Well, the first step to any sort of no-fly zone would be to attack the air defense systems within Libya. So that essentially means that we'd be attacking Libya. It won't necessarily be something where we'd be preventing the airplanes from operating in the north or in the south or even in the east. It would essentially be attacking an outright attack on Libya. And this comes on top of the operations and contingencies that we have in Yemen, in Somalia, in Pakistan, in Iraq, and Afghanistan. This would just add to the plethora of foreign policy and contingencies that we already have. And really, I think you brought up an excellent point in that why don't we just leave the Libyan people alone? Why don't we allow them to sort out their own affairs? And I think, unfortunately, when we get wrapped up in these discussions, it becomes psychologically satisfying for us to want to do something.
Right.
But we can't mold and shape developments to our liking.
Right. I mean, and Gaddafi is an odd character. I mean, in 1986,
Absolutely.
Reagan bombed his home because of his support for terrorism. In 2003, Prime Minister Blair and then President Bush actually embraced him because he agreed to get rid of what we now know was some useless, almost worthless nuclear waste material that we thought he could somehow turn into a bomb. Now, of course, he's demonized, and rightly so, because he's killing his own people. But here's the big question. How do we decide who are our enemies and who are our friends? And why should the American government even consider trying to kill this guy or kill his troops or set him back irreparably?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think it depends on where U.S. interests are being served. And what's interesting is that we're talking about Libya, but no one's talking about the Ivory Coast. And for the past several months, they've been engaged in a very bloody and protracted struggle, political struggle. There are actually two parallel governments that are operating right now on the Ivory Coast. But no one's talking about intervening there. So it becomes a question of where do we decide to intervene? When do we not decide to intervene? And particularly in the case with Libya, I think in the short term, it might be very, very well helpful to the rebels. But we also need to consider what it might do in the long term in terms of delegitimizing the rebel and the protest movements. And really, I think the moment we decide to intervene, it will be depriving the Libyan people of the ability to achieve freedom for themselves. But this is their revolution. It's not ours.
Wouldn't we actually harm their ability to achieve freedom for themselves? Don't they, for reasons not necessary to explore now, actually hate the U.S. more than they hate Gaddafi? Wouldn't this crystallize some people to support him who otherwise would be neutral or be adverse to him?
That is absolutely right. In fact, the interim council in the east of Libya, they've actually come out and said that they don't want U.S. intervention. They want to, again, they want to have this sort of catharsis. They want to be able to unseat the leader who's been ruling them for 40 years, that's been essentially calling them cockroaches and rats and actually encouraging his military to go house to house and hunting these people down. Again, when we sort of put our own lens onto the situation, we deprive the ability of Libyans to achieve freedom on their own in the way they see fit. And I think it becomes something of we want to sort of mold and shape reality in the outcome. And this is why you see people on the left and the right coming together and wanting to intervene. This is sort of the same contingency that we saw with Iraq, where you saw people on the left and the right joining together and wanting to intervene.
Right. Malou, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.